Jake Miller stood on the bridge of the human ship Starlight and watched the alien world grow larger on the main screen. The planet looked like a giant blue crystal spinning in space. Strange towers reached up from its surface, like needles made of light. This was Zephyria, home to the first alien race the humans had ever met. Jake was 35 years old and had spent most of his life talking to difficult people. He had worked as a diplomat on Earth for 10 years before the space program picked him for this mission. The government thought he was good at making friends with strangers. Today he would find out if that skill worked with beings from another world. Dr. Lisa Stone walked up beside him. She was the team's expert on alien life. Lisa had studied every piece of information they had about the Zephyrians, which was not very much. The aliens had sent only a few messages to Earth after they detected human radio signals. Most of what they knew came from those short communications. "Remember what we discussed," Lisa said quietly. "The Zephyrians seem to be very careful about everything they do. They take a long time to make decisions. They want to study every possible outcome before they act." Jake nodded. He had read all the reports. The alien messages were full of warnings about being cautious and taking time to think. The Zephyrians had agreed to meet with humans only after months of careful planning. Even then, they insisted the meeting happened on their world where they felt safe. The ship's pilot announced they were ready to land. Jake looked around the bridge at his small team. Dr. Amy Brooks was their expert on alien cultures. She spent her time trying to understand how different societies worked. Commander Rick Hayes was their military advisor, a calm man who always seemed ready for trouble. These three people would represent all of humanity in the most important meeting in history. The shuttle ride down to the planet's surface was smooth. Jake watched through the window as they flew over cities that looked like they were made of colored glass. Tall spires twisted up into the sky in patterns that seemed impossible. Everything glowed with soft light that changed colors as they passed overhead. The landing platform was a circle of white crystal that hummed with energy. As soon as the shuttle touched down, Jake could see figures waiting for them. The aliens were tall and thin, much taller than humans. Their skin looked like it was made of pale blue glass that light could shine through. They wore long robes that seemed to float around their bodies. Jake stepped out of the shuttle first. The air on Zephyria felt thick and warm. It smelled like flowers and electricity mixed together. The gravity was lighter than Earth, making each step feel like a small bounce. The aliens watched him carefully as he walked toward them. The lead alien moved forward. She was even taller than the others, with silver patterns that moved across her transparent skin like living tattoos. When she spoke, her voice was like music played through water. "I am Ambassador Valtara," she said. "Welcome to our world, humans." Jake smiled and held out his hand. "I'm Captain Jake Miller. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us." Valtara looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment. The patterns on her skin shifted and changed colors. Finally, she reached out and touched his hand briefly with her long fingers. Her skin felt cool and smooth, like touching polished stone. "Please follow us," she said. "We have prepared a place for our discussions." They walked through corridors that seemed to be carved from single pieces of crystal. The walls glowed with their own light, and Jake could see strange symbols floating in the crystal like trapped fireflies. Everything was beautiful, but alien. Nothing looked like anything humans had ever built. Jake found himself reaching out to touch the walls as they walked. The crystal felt warm under his fingers and seemed to pulse with life. Behind him, he heard Dr. Brooks whisper warnings about contamination, but Jake was too curious to stop exploring. Valtara noticed his behavior. The patterns on her skin changed again, this time to darker colors. She exchanged what looked like worried glances with the other aliens. They began speaking to each other in their own language, which sounded like wind chimes mixed with wail songs. The meeting hall was a vast room with a ceiling that seemed to disappear into the sky. Floating crystals drifted around the space like small moons, each one glowing with different colors. In the center of the room was a table that looked like it had grown from the floor dot. As they sat down, Jake noticed that the alien chairs adjusted themselves to fit his human body. The technology was amazing, but what impressed him most was how the aliens seemed to control everything just by thinking about it. The floating crystals moved to provide perfect lighting, and the table's surface showed images and text in both human and alien languages. "We are pleased to begin our discussions," Veltara said. "But first, we must establish proper safety protocols. There are many unknowns in this situation that require careful consideration." Jake leaned forward in his chair. "We appreciate your caution, but we're excited to learn about your people. We've come a long way to meet you." The patterns on Veltara's skin shifted again. This time they formed shapes that the translation device said meant confusion and concern. She looked at Jake as if he had said something very strange. "Excitement in the face of the unknown is an interesting response," she said slowly. "Most intelligent beings would feel apprehension when confronted with so many variables and potential risks." Jake realized that the cultural differences between humans and Zephyrians might be bigger than anyone had expected. The way Veltara spoke made it clear that she could not understand why humans would feel anything but fear when meeting aliens for the first time. To her, the smart response to uncertainty was worry and careful planning. As the first day of meetings began, Jake started to see that this mission would be more challenging than anyone had imagined. The aliens were not just different in how they looked. They thought about the world in completely different ways. What humans saw as exciting opportunities, the Zephyrians saw as dangerous unknowns that needed to be approached with extreme care. The real test of human diplomacy was just beginning. The second day of meetings started early. Jake sat at the crystal table while Veltara and her team presented their ideas for trade between the two species. Each proposal came with thick documents that listed every possible problem that could happen. The aliens had charts showing risk levels for different types of contact. They had backup plans for their backup plans. Dr. Amy Brooks took careful notes as the Zephyrians explained their trading system. Everything they did involved long periods of study and testing. Before they would sell anything to humans, they wanted to spend several years making sure it was completely safe. They spoke about maybe starting small trade deals in 20 or 30 Earth years if all the studies went well. Jake tried to hide his frustration. At this rate, humans would be old and gray before any real cooperation happened. He looked at Commander Rick Hayes, who was also struggling to stay patient. Rick was used to military planning where decisions had to be made quickly when situations changed. "With respect," Jake said during a break in the presentations, "humans tend to learn by doing things rather than just studying them. We understand being careful, but we also believe that some risks are worth taking if the benefits are large enough." Veltara's skin patterns shifted to what the translator called deep concern. "This approach seems dangerous to us. How can you act without knowing all the possible outcomes? What if your actions cause harm that could have been prevented with proper study?" Dr. Brooks tried to bridge the gap between the two ways of thinking. "In human culture, we balance caution with action. We do research, but we also believe that experience teaches us things that theory cannot. We have learned that waiting too long for perfect information can mean missing good opportunities." The alien scientists looked at each other with worried expressions. One of them, Dr. Zinkar, spoke up. "But surely you must see the wisdom in thorough preparation. How has your species survived if you take actions without complete knowledge?" Rick Hayes answered this time. "We survived because we adapted quickly to new situations. When our ancestors faced unknown environments, they had to explore and learn fast, or they would die. Being too careful could be just as dangerous as being too reckless. This explanation seemed to make the aliens even more confused. Their entire civilization was built on the idea that careful planning prevented disasters. The concept that quick action could sometimes be safer than slow planning was completely foreign to them. After lunch, Veltara offered to show the human team a Zephyrian research facility. The building was another crystal structure, but this one was filled with machines that hummed with energy. Alien scientists worked at stations where floating displays showed complex data about different experiments. Jake walked through the facility with great interest. He asked questions about how the machines worked and what the scientists were studying. When they reached a laboratory where new devices were being tested, Jake saw something that caught his attention. "What does that device do?" he asked, pointing to a small crystal scanner sitting on a table. The alien scientist, Dr. Morthic, explained that it was a biological mapping tool. It could scan any living being and create a detailed picture of how their body worked. The device was completely harmless and worked by reading natural energy fields that all living things produced. "Could it scan a human?" Jake asked. "It would be interesting to see how human biology looks to your technology." Dr. Morthic stepped back in alarm. "That would require extensive testing first. We would need to study human biological patterns for months before we could safely use the device. There could be unknown interactions with your cellular structure." Jake reached toward the scanner. "But you said it was harmless. It just reads energy fields, right? What's the worst that could happen?" Before anyone could stop him, Jake picked up the device and activated it. The scanner glowed softly and projected a three-dimensional image of Jake's body into the air above it. The image showed his skeleton, organs, and circulatory system in beautiful detail. Everyone could see his heart beating and his lungs expanding with each breath. The Zephyrian scientists were horrified. Dr. Morthic's skin flashed bright red, which the translator said meant extreme alarm. Several other aliens backed away from Jake, as if he had done something incredibly dangerous. "You could have been seriously injured," Dr. Morthic said, his voice shaking. "We had no data on how the scanner would interact with human biology. You could have suffered cellular damage or worse." Jake looked at the detailed image of his body, floating in the air. "But I didn't get hurt. The scan worked perfectly. Now we have useful information about human biology that we didn't have before." Veltara pulled Jake aside while her scientists carefully shut down the scanner and began running safety checks on the area. The patterns on her skin were moving so fast they were hard to follow. "Why aren't you afraid, human?" she asked. Her voice carried genuine confusion and worry. "That device could have had unknown effects on your body. Any rational being would require months of testing before exposing themselves to unfamiliar technology." Jake thought about how to explain human behavior to someone who seemed to find it completely illogical. "I was curious about how it worked. You said it was safe, and the principle seemed simple enough. Sometimes the best way to learn something is to try it and see what happens." "But what if you had been wrong? What if the device had hurt you?" Veltara asked. "Then we would have learned something important about the differences between human and Zephyrian biology," Jake replied. "That would have been valuable information too, even if it came with some cost." Veltara stared at him for a long moment. "Your species makes decisions based on incomplete information and accepts the possibility of negative outcomes in exchange for the chance to gain knowledge quickly." "That's one way to put it," Jake said. "We call it being willing to take reasonable risks. And who decides what risks are reasonable?" she asked. Jake smiled. "Usually the person taking the risk." This answer seemed to disturb Veltara more than anything else he had said. In Zephyrian society, risk assessment was done by committees of experts who spent long periods studying every angle. The idea that individuals could make such decisions for themselves was completely outside their experience. As they returned to the meeting room, Jake could see that the cultural gap between humans and Zephyrians was even bigger than he had thought. It was not just about being careful versus being bold. The two species had completely different ideas about how decisions should be made and who should make them. The Zephyrians valued group consensus and expert analysis. They believed that wisdom came from careful study and collective deliberation. Humans, on the other hand, often trusted individual judgment and personal experience. They believed that sometimes action was more important than analysis. That evening, as Jake wrote his report back to Earth, he wondered if these differences could ever be bridged. The Zephyrians saw human behavior as dangerously reckless. Humans found Zephyrian caution frustratingly slow. Both species thought their own approach was the smart one and could not understand how the other had survived using such obviously flawed methods. The next few days would test whether two completely different philosophies could find a way to work together. Jake hoped that understanding and compromise were possible, but he was beginning to realize that first contact was going to be much more complicated than anyone had expected. Jake was eating breakfast in his guest quarters when alarms started ringing throughout the Zephyrian facility. The crystal walls flashed red warning lights, and alien voices spoke rapidly over communication systems. Jake could not understand the words, but the tone was clearly urgent. He rushed to the main meeting room where Veltara and her team were gathered around floating displays showing emergency data. The patterns on their skin were all flashing the same dark red color that meant serious danger. "What's happening?" Jake asked as Dr. Brooks and Commander Hayes joined him. Veltara looked up from the displays with worry clear on her face. "There has been an accident at one of our mining operations on the third moon. A section of tunnels has collapsed, trapping several of our workers underground." The displays showed detailed maps of the mine and real-time sensor data from the accident. Sight. Jake could see that 6 Zephyrian miners were trapped in a chamber deep underground. The tunnels leading to them were blocked by tons of fallen rock, and the structural scans showed that more collapses were likely. "How long before you can get them out?" Rick Hayes asked. Dr. Zinkar, who was coordinating the rescue effort, answered, without looking away from his data screens. "Our engineering teams are developing a comprehensive rescue plan. We must conduct detailed geological surveys of the entire area to identify safe excavation routes. Then we will need to design and build specialized equipment for the specific rock formations involved." "How long will that take?" Jake pressed. "If all goes according to schedule, we estimate 60 to 70 hours for planning and preparation. Then another 40 hours for the actual rescue operation." Amy Brooks did quick calculations in her head. "That's more than 4 days total. How much life support do the trapped miners have?" The room fell silent for a moment. Veltara finally answered. "Our estimates suggest they have enough air and emergency supplies for approximately 90 hours. Jake felt his stomach tighten. The Zephyrians were planning a rescue operation that would take longer than the miners could survive. When he said this out loud, the aliens looked at him with confusion. "We must follow proper safety protocols," Dr. Zinkar explained. "Rushing into an unstable underground environment without complete geological analysis would only create more casualties. It is unfortunate, but we cannot risk additional lives on uncertain rescue attempts." "What about immediate action?" Rick Hayes suggested. "Our ship has mining equipment and explosives. We could start clearing the tunnels while you do your analysis." The Zephyrian rescue coordinator looked horrified. That approach would be completely irresponsible. Without detailed structural surveys, you could cause additional collapses that would kill the trapped workers and anyone trying to rescue them. Jake studied the displays, showing the mine layout. His human mind immediately began seeing possibilities that the careful Zephyrian planning process was not considering. What if we use controlled charges to create new access routes? Our military. Engineers train for rapid excavation in combat zones. Absolutely not, Dr. Zinkar said firmly. Such methods might work on your world, but this is a completely different geological environment. The rock formations here have unique crystalline structures that could respond unpredictably to explosive force. The argument continued for another hour, while precious time ticked away. The Zephyrians had detailed plans for every aspect of the rescue, but all of their plans required days of preparation time that the trapped miners did not have. The humans suggested faster approaches, but the aliens rejected every idea as too dangerous. Finally, Jake made a decision that he knew would cause serious diplomatic problems. Commander Hayes, get our team back to the ship. We're going to help those miners. Veltara stepped in front of him. You cannot take such action without proper authorization and planning. You do not understand the risks involved. I understand that 6 people are going to die while we argue about the safest way to save them, Jake replied. Sometimes the biggest risk is waiting too long to act. Rick Hayes was already moving toward the exit. I'll get our equipment loaded and ready for transport. How much time do we have? Less than we need, Jake said, but more than they'll have if we follow the Zephyrian rescue timeline. Dr. Brooks looked torn between supporting her teammate and respecting alien customs. Jake, what if we're wrong? What if our methods make things worse? Then we'll deal with the consequences, Jake said. But I'm not going to stand here and let people die because we were too afraid to try. The humans left the facility despite strong protests from the Zephyrians. Veltara followed them, arguing that their actions could destroy the diplomatic relationship between the two species. Jake listened to her concerns, but did not change his mind. Within 2 hours, the human team had transported their equipment to the mining moon. The accident site was a mess of broken crystal formations and collapsed tunnels. Jake could see why the Zephyrians were worried about structural stability, but he could also see clear routes for emergency access that their careful planning process was ignoring. Rick Hayes set up a command post while Jake and Amy Brooks studied the mine layout. The trapped miners were in a chamber about 60 meters underground, surrounded by unstable tunnel sections that could collapse at any time. We can't use standard mining techniques, Rick observed, but we might be able to create a small access shaft using shaped charges and portable drilling equipment. Jake nodded. It's risky, but it's faster than waiting for the Zephyrian equipment to be built and tested. Amy Brooks was monitoring communications from the trapped miners. Their air quality is already getting worse. They're showing signs of carbon dioxide poisoning. Veltara and several Zephyrian officials arrived at the mining site just as the humans began their rescue attempt. They watched in horror as Rick Hayes placed explosive charges in carefully calculated positions around the collapse zone. This is madness, Veltara said to Jake. You are working with incomplete information in a completely unstable environment. If you trigger another collapse, you will kill everyone down there. If we don't try, they're dead anyway, Jake replied. Sometimes you have to act on the best information you have, rather than waiting for perfect knowledge. The first controlled explosion cleared a significant amount of debris from the main tunnel. Jake felt the ground shake under his feet, and for a moment he wondered if the Zephyrians were right about the risks. But the structural sensors that the blast had actually stabilized some of the surrounding rock formations. It's working, Amy Brooks reported. We're getting new communication signals from the trapped miners. Over the next 8 hours, the human team worked steadily to clear access routes to the trapped chamber. Each step was carefully planned, but the planning happened in minutes rather than days. They used portable equipment and quick decision-making to adapt to changing conditions underground. Veltara watched the entire operation with growing amazement. The humans were taking risks that would paralyze her people with fear, but they were also making steady progress toward reaching the miners. Their approach was chaotic compared to Zephyrian methods, but it was undeniably effective. As the rescue entered its final phase, Jake realized that success or failure would depend on one last dangerous gamble. The humans had cleared most of the debris, but the final barrier required either a precision, explosive charge or another full day of careful drilling. The trapped miners had less than 6 hours of air remaining. Jake stared at the final barrier, blocking the trapped miners. The rock wall was only 3 meters thick, but it was made of crystalline formations that could shatter unpredictably if handled wrong. The Zephyrian geological data showed stress fractures running through the entire section, making it extremely dangerous to blast. "We could drill through it," Rick Hayes said, studying his portable scanners. "But that will take at least 8 hours with our equipment." Amy Brooks checked the air quality readings from the trapped chamber. "The miners have maybe 5 hours of breathable air left. Carbon dioxide levels are rising faster than we expected." Jake felt the weight of 6 lives in his hands. One wrong decision could kill everyone they were trying to save. He understood now why the Zephyrians preferred to take time and plan carefully. The fear of making a fatal mistake was almost overwhelming. Veltara approached the human command post. Her skin patterns showed a mixture of concern and something else that Jake had not seen before. "The precision required for this final step is beyond current human or Zephyrian capabilities," she said quietly. "The rock formation is too unstable for explosive charges, and drilling will take too long." "There has to be something we can do," Jake said. "We've come too far to give up now." Dr. Brooks was studying the geological data on her portable computer. "What if we combine human speed with Zephyrian precision? We have the explosives expertise, but you have detailed knowledge of these rock formations." Veltara looked surprised. "You would trust our analysis even though our methods are so different from yours?" "Your caution exists for good reasons," Jake admitted. "We've seen how dangerous it is to act without enough information. Maybe we need both approaches." For the first time since the crisis began, Veltara seemed to consider working with human methods rather than against them. She called for her geological team to bring their most detailed scanners to the mining site. Dr. Zinkar arrived with equipment that could map the stress patterns in the crystalline rock down to the molecular level. The Zephyrian scanners were far more advanced than anything humans had built, but they were also slow and required careful calibration. "If we can identify the exact weak points in the crystal matrix," Dr. Zinkar explained, "it might be possible to use very small charges to create controlled fractures that would open a passage without causing a major collapse." Rick Hayes studied the detailed scans with growing excitement. "This could work. Instead of one big blast, we use a series of tiny explosions timed to work with the natural stress patterns in the rock." The plan was incredibly complex and required split-second timing. The humans would place microcharges at specific points, identified by Zephyrian analysis, then detonate them in a precise sequence that would crack the rock along predictable lines. "The margin for error is extremely small," Dr. Zinkar warned. "If any charge detonates even a few milliseconds early or late, the entire formation could collapse." Jake looked at his team. This was the kind of high-risk, high-precision operation that combined the worst aspects of both human and Zephyrian approaches. It required quick action and perfect planning at the same time. "We'll do it," he decided. "Amy, coordinate with Dr. Zinkar on the timing sequences. Rick, start placing the charges exactly where their scans indicate." As the humans and Zephyrians worked together, something unexpected happened. Veltara found herself making quick decisions based on incomplete information something that should have been impossible for her careful nature. When new stress fractures appeared in the rock, she adapted the plan without stopping to run full analysis protocols. "You're thinking like a human," Amy Brooks observed, as Veltara rapidly adjusted the charge placement pattern. "I am discovering." "That fear does not have to prevent action," Veltara replied. "Your species has taught me that uncertainty can be managed rather than eliminated." The final preparation took 2 hours of intense work. Every microcharge had to be placed with millimeter precision. The timing system required coordination between human explosive techniques and Zephyrian computational analysis. Both teams were working at the edge of their capabilities. When everything was ready, Jake realized that he was more afraid than he had ever been in his life. 6 lives depended on their plan working perfectly, and there were dozens of ways it could go wrong. For the first time, he truly understood why the Zephyrians found uncertainty so terrifying. "Detonation in 10 seconds, Rick Hayes announced. "All personnel to minimum safe distance." Jake watched the countdown timer and felt his heart pounding. This was the moment when human courage and Zephyrian wisdom would either save lives or cause a disaster that would haunt both species forever. The explosions came in rapid sequence, each one precisely timed to work with the rock's natural stress patterns. Jake felt the ground shake beneath his feet as tons of crystalline stone shifted and cracked. For a terrible moment, he thought the entire tunnel system was collapsing. Then the dust settled, and emergency lights showed a narrow passage leading through the barrier. The plan had worked, but barely. Several support beams were cracked, and the passage was only just wide enough for rescue workers to squeeze through. "Go, go, go," Rick Hayes shouted as the rescue team rushed into the newly opened tunnel. Jake followed them into the passage, crawling through spaces that seemed ready to collapse at any moment. The fear he felt was different from anything he had experienced before. It was not the exciting fear of exploring something new, but the cold terror of knowing that death was only seconds away if anything went wrong. Behind him, he could hear Veltara following the rescue team into the tunnel. She was experiencing the same kind of fear that was making his hands shake, but she was moving forward anyway. The crisis had taught her something about managing fear that her cautious culture had never shown her. They reached the trapped miners just as their air supplies ran out. All 6 Zephyrians were unconscious from carbon dioxide poisoning, but they were still alive. The rescue team worked frantically to get breathing equipment to them, and then began the delicate process of moving them through the unstable tunnel. Jake helped carry the last miner to safety as the passage finally began to collapse behind them. They had succeeded, but just barely. A few more minutes, and everyone would have died underground. As the rescued miners received medical treatment, Jake sat on the ground and tried to stop his hands from shaking. The fear and stress of the rescue operation had drained him completely. Beside him, Veltara was experiencing something similar, her skin patterns flickering with exhaustion and relief. "I understand now why your species finds our caution frustrating," she said quietly. "But I also understand why caution exists. The fear I felt in that tunnel was almost overwhelming." Jake nodded. "And I understand why you take time to plan carefully. We came very close to making things worse instead of better. Without your geological analysis, our explosives would have killed everyone." They sat in silence for a while, both realizing that the rescue operation had changed their understanding of each other's cultures. The humans had learned that their boldness needed to be tempered with wisdom and careful analysis. The Zephyrians had discovered that fear could be faced and managed rather than avoided. 3 days after the rescue, Jake sat in the same crystal meeting room where the diplomatic talks had begun. But everything felt different now. The Zephyrian officials, who had seemed impossibly cautious before now, looked at the human team with something that might have been respect. Veltara entered the room with a document that glowed with official seals and symbols. Her skin patterns were calmer than Jake had ever seen them, showing colors that the translator identified as thoughtfulness and determination. "The Council of Elders has reviewed what happened during the mining crisis," she announced. "They have asked me to present new proposals for cooperation between our species." Jake exchanged glances with Amy Brooks and Rick Hayes. After the tensions of the rescue operation, none of them had been sure that diplomatic relations would continue at all. The fact that the Zephyrians wanted to move forward was encouraging news. "We have realized that our previous approach to cooperation was based on incomplete understanding," Veltara continued. "We assumed that all intelligent species would share our preference for extensive planning and risk avoidance. The rescue operation showed us that different approaches to uncertainty can be valuable in different situations." Daya Zinkar, who had worked closely with the humans during the rescue, spoke up from his seat at the table. "Your species' ability to function effectively under extreme uncertainty is remarkable. Our analysis shows that traditional Zephyrian rescue protocols would have resulted in the loss of all 6 trapped miners. But your detailed geological analysis was crucial to our success," Rick Hayes pointed out. "Without your scanners and computational models, our explosive techniques would have caused a complete tunnel collapse." Amy Brooks leaned forward with interest. "It sounds like both approaches have strengths that could complement each other." Veltara skin patterns shifted to what the translator called agreement and excitement. "This is exactly what our council concluded. We propose a new framework for cooperation that combines human adaptability with Zephyrian analytical capabilities." She activated the room's display systems, and floating images showed detailed plans for joint operations between the two species. The proposals were ambitious and comprehensive, covering everything from scientific research to exploration missions. The first project would be a joint exploration of the Nexus system, Veltara explained. "It contains several planets that show signs of ancient civilizations, but the entire region is surrounded by gravitational anomalies and radiation fields that make exploration extremely dangerous." Jake studied the star charts floating above the table. The Nexus system was located at the edge of known space, where strange phenomena made navigation almost impossible. It was exactly the kind of place that would terrify the cautious Zephyrians and excite adventurous humans. Human crews would lead the actual exploration missions, Dr. Zinkar continued. "Your ability to adapt quickly to unknown situations makes you ideal for this role. Zephyrian support teams would provide detailed analysis of environmental hazards and technological backup systems." "What would be the division of responsibilities?" Amy Brooks asked. Veltara brought up new displays showing organizational charts and operational procedures. Human teams would make tactical decisions during exploration missions. Zephyrian teams would handle strategic planning and risk assessment before and after each operation. Both groups would share information continuously to ensure optimal results. Jake was impressed by how thoroughly the aliens had thought through the proposal. They had found a way to use human boldness and Zephyrian caution as complementary strengths, rather than opposing weaknesses. "There's something else," Veltara said, and her skin patterns showed what looked like personal satisfaction. "I have requested assignment as the Zephyrian liaison for the Joint Exploration Program. The Council was initially concerned about my exposure to human risk-taking behaviors, but I convinced them that I had learned to manage uncertainty constructively." "You want to go on exploration missions with human crews?" Rick Hayes asked with surprise. "I want to continue learning how to function effectively while afraid," Veltara replied. "The rescue operation taught me that fear can provide valuable information without controlling my actions. This is a completely new concept for my people, and I believe it has significant potential for our future development." Jake felt a smile spreading across his face. "So you're saying that working with humans has made you braver?" Veltara considered this question seriously, not braver in the sense of feeling less fear. The unknown still frightens me, as it should any rational being. But I have learned that being afraid does not mean being helpless. Your species has shown me that fear can be acknowledged and then set aside in favor of necessary action. Amy Brooks was taking notes rapidly. This could be the foundation for a completely new model of interspecies cooperation. Instead of trying to find common ground, we're learning to use our differences as advantages. The discussions continued for hours as both teams worked out the details of the joint exploration program. The humans would provide rapid response capabilities and field expertise. The Zephyrians would contribute advanced technology and comprehensive analytical support. Together, they could tackle challenges that neither species could handle alone. Not by the end of the day, they had drafted agreements for 3 major cooperative projects. The Nexus system exploration was just the beginning. Future plans included joint research stations, cultural exchange programs, and even combined military units for situations that required both human adaptability and Zephyrian precision. As the formal signing ceremony began, Jake reflected on how much had changed since their first meeting. The rescue crisis had forced both species to see past their initial assumptions about each other. Humans had learned that caution and careful planning were not signs of cowardice, but evidence of wisdom. Zephyrians had discovered that boldness and quick action were not reckless behaviors, but necessary survival skills. "I have a question for you, Jake Miller," Veltara said, as they prepared to sign the cooperation agreements. "What's that? Why aren't you afraid of working so closely with an alien species that thinks so differently from humans?" Jake thought about the question for a moment. "I am afraid, actually. This partnership could fail in ways that we haven't even imagined yet. Our differences could cause serious problems down the road. Then why are you willing to proceed?" "Because I've learned that being afraid doesn't mean I have to let fear make my decisions for me," Jake replied. "Sometimes the most important things are also the most frightening. The potential benefits of human-Zephyrian cooperation are worth the risks involved." Veltara's skin patterns showed what the translator identified as deep satisfaction and approval. "I understand now. You are not fearless. You simply refuse to allow fear to prevent you from pursuing worthwhile goals. And I've learned that being careful isn't the same as being afraid," Jake said. "Your people's caution will help keep us alive while we explore the impossible together." As they signed the historic agreements, both species looked forward to a future that neither could have imagined alone. The combination of human courage and Zephyrian wisdom would open new possibilities for exploration, discovery, and growth. The first joint mission to the Nexus system was scheduled to launch in 6 months. Jake would lead the human exploration team, while Veltara would coordinate Zephyrian analytical support. Together, they would venture into unknown space where strange phenomena waited to challenge everything they thought they knew about the universe. The partnership between humans and Zephyrians had begun with a simple question about fear and courage. It would continue with both species learning that their different approaches to uncertainty could create something stronger than either could achieve alone. As Jake prepared to return to Earth with news of the successful negotiations, he realized that first contact had taught him as much about humanity as it had about alien cultures. Sometimes the most important discoveries came not from exploring distant worlds, but from learning to see familiar things through completely different eyes.